Greetings, friends. Novooleksandrivka here, and this is the weekly Russian Ukrainian War update for the week of June 10th through June 16th of 2024. And if you want to continue receiving these weekly Russian Ukrainian War updates, be sure to subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up, comment your thoughts, and share this video around. So let's get into the updates. And this week, we actually have a lot of updates. Updates on basically the entire front. The Russian summer offensive is in full swing. And a lot of people, unless you were expecting a bigger offensive, but if you've been following this, where you understand that offensives mean slow grinding attrition with trying to each side jousting for tactical positioning. That's what it means by offensive, by the way. And in this sense, which is how the war has been since about April of after the Russians failed in their attempt to take Kiev, the war has been just an attritional fight, and with slow tactical grindings, and that's how offensive will be until one side breaks. When will either side break? We don't know yet. There's a lot of things that go into that calculation, but regardless, there is movement on the ground. And in this week, we're gonna first off start off on the Avdiivka section, or the Pokrovsk direction, as the Avdiivka has been taken, and now the front's moving towards the city of Pokrovsk. But and this is where a lot of the main advances have been of the Russians, and this is where I think the Russians are also putting their main push as well. We're going to start out in the northern section here. So this week we saw, for depending on who you ask, about the full capture of the village of Novooleksandrivka. Now, it depends on who you ask. Most sources and geolocated footage shows that the center of the village has been taken. However, this dam is where it gets contested. Some pro-Russian sources say that the dam is also taken by the Russians. So the front line actually goes something like this. And the Russians have complete control of the town. If you want to believe more pro-Ukrainian or pro-neutral sources, they say this dam is still being contested, and the Ukrainians, or at least is in the gray zone, and the Ukrainians are have fallen back to this village of Novooleksandrivka, which is the last village before the Russians reached their goal of cutting the Konstantinovka-Pokrovsk highway, which would be very bad for the Ukrainians. The capture of Novooleksandrivka not only is a major step towards cutting the Konstantinovka-Pokrovsk highway, it also secures the northern flank of this entire, as the Russians advance and try to push the Ukrainians towards the Vuchachka River here. One thing that also is of note is that the Russians have secured the southern positions of Novooleksandrivka. It's not like they just entered the town and left their flanks exposed. The Russians have also secured this area right here in the south. Some sources say the Russians have also taken this tree line right here. Yeah, we got geolocated footage of Russians in the southern part of Novooleksandrivka, and if that is the case, then I would expect that the Russians are right now trying to secure themselves along this rail line. And this actually brings us to the second part of this, is the Battle of Sokol. Now, the Russians entered Sokol last week, but we now got more clarification of what the situation on the ground looks like. Right now, Sokol is not completely taken. Most sources say that the village itself of Sokol, this area right here, has been taken by the Russians. But what's important about Sokol is actually the strong Ukrainian defense in the north, this area right here. And this is still under Ukrainian control. So Ukrainian positions in the north of Sokol, which need to be taken in order for the Russians to continue pushing towards Poris and such, which is the main objective in pushing the Ukrainians away from Donetsk here and reaching the Vuchachka River. We saw geolocated footage of Russian troops disembarking and entering Sokol, and they've taken the city itself, but tactically that doesn't really matter much, because they need to first of all take this giant, you could see this massive trench network here. Even Google Maps shows us it here. So, however, the advancements in the south of Novooleksandrivka, as the Russians try to clear this tree line and clear the positions north here, and if the Russians keep their positions in the south here, I could definitely see a positional bat where they put pressure from the north and from the south and force the Ukrainians from this area. So the Ukrainians are starting to get surrounded in their stronghold here. So the Battle of Sokol is still going on, but the Russians have a foothold in it, and they are with the capture of Novooleksandrivka in the north. They'll be able to squeeze the Ukrainians out and have to push them back to Voskok and Yevdenivka here, and these villages are very small. They're like one road basically. They don't have as big of a stronghold as Sokol has, but the Russians might be able to take this pretty easily once Sokol falls, and then the Ukrainians will fall back to Porez and Vachi here, and which is. And after that, I think that's where the Russians will pause, because, again, they're going to use the Vachachka River as a natural defense line, and then I think once they reach this, they're going to start moving more toward the northwest here. It's going to stop focusing toward. I don't think they're going to move towards Selidova. I think the Russian focus is going to reach the Vachachka River here, and then the focus will start moving more to the north here, because they're trying to link up the intense battles happening for Chasiv Yar and also happening in this area right here. But they want a natural defense line to align their flanks as they move towards this area. So Novooleksandrivka has fallen, and once the Russians secure themselves here a bit better, I'm expecting them to start trying to attack the village of Volozhdanivka here, and I think also the Russians will try to secure their, again, since the main goal here is to reach the village of Porez here. They'll also probably try to secure the northern flank of that. So they'll probably take these two villages right here to secure their flank here. Have something like this. If the Russians want to be a bit more bold, maybe they could maybe take Ivanivka and have this be and use this little water ravine as a northern defense line here, and then Ivanivka will be the frontline village along with Porez, and the Ukrainians will fall back to the village of Grodovivka here, which is actually very dangerous, because now once the Ukrainians fall back here, they're now in the outskirts of Minograd and Pokrovsk, and while it's maybe not a suburb of those cities, it's like getting very close to Pokrovsk at that point, and that's very dangerous. But I think the Russians won't continue advancing. I think they'll start moving towards the northwest and try to maybe start focusing on taking Toretsk or encircling it, which could happen if they take Chasiv Yar. So yeah, I could expect the Novooleksandrivka and Sokol to be cleared up by the end of next week, and the Russians will start trying to move towards these two villages, and the Russians will probably start advancing towards the village of Yelskaviskas here, because then this secures their northern advance, and they can start attacking Porez probably from the north. Let's now go to more to the southern portion of this Pokrovsk front here, or the part of the Donetsk front, and there's actually been a lot of progress here as well. Another village the Russians have captured is the village of Novopokrovska here. We saw footage of the Russians raising their flag on the western part of this village, confirming that this village has been captured by the Russians. The Russians have actually made a lot of progress in the fields between Novoselivka, Pershi, and Sninivka. The Ukrainian second-line defense going around Novopokrovska and Novoselivka, Pershi is now crumbling, along with their third line of defense, which is Sokol, Porez, and this area right here. And basically, after the Russians took the first line of defense that the Ukrainians set up after the fall of Avdiivka, they were hoping to have the Russians attack across these fields directly. What facilitated the fall of Novopokrovska was that it was Orcheshiny, and the fall of Orcheshiny is what allowed the Russians to bloom in these directions, to take Karamik and Novokilanova, Arkhangelska, allowing them to actually advance towards the Konstantinivka Pokrovsk highway. And this is what allowed them to take Novopokrovsk, because the defenses of Novopokrovsk were expecting a direct attack from here, and then since this will have to go through the fields, they were able to drone them with drones. But since the attack also came from here, from their flank, this facilitated the rapid fall of Novopokrovska. So a lot of the fields between Sinivka and Novopokrovska have been taken. And this week, we can now say that the battle for Novoselivka Pershi has begun. This is a huge village, this very big village. It's probably the biggest one here outside. Probably the biggest one outside of or Chechnya Novooleksandrivka. And so this is the last stand for the Ukrainians, because if this falls, then the Ukrainians will have to fall back to the Vochachka River, and this is the last. If they want to make a last stand, if they want to keep their foothold on this side of the Vochachka River, they'll have to hold their line here. However, this is going to be a tough send, because not only now are the Russians on getting to the eastern outskirts of Novooleksandrivka by getting Novopokrovska, as we mentioned in the north here, I expect Sokol to be cleared up probably within a week or two. And then, we'll see within a week or two also Voskok and Vinivka fall. So probably by the end of June or so, we might expect to see some sort of, the front line kind of go, maybe something like this. And, the Russians will be, pushing towards Vozivka, Porez. But at this point right here, they'll also be able to start attacking Novooleksandrivka from the north here, along with from the west. And then also, we have a lot of confirmation from the south here. The Russians are advancing to the fields to the north of Umanska and picking up positions to the south of Novooleksandrivka. What is a little bit of a saving grace is that Yosnobrovka has not fallen. I actually have no clue how. I was expecting this village to be stormed by now, but somehow the Ukrainians are still holding, and this prevents the Russians from getting right behind Novooleksandrivka. So that's a little bit of a saving grace for the Ukrainians, but the Russians will be attacking it from three sides very soon, and we could probably see the fall of Novooleksandrivka a lot faster than usual, because since the Russians are right now in the back of this allows them to facilitate the fall of this town very easily, or faster than it would be if they were just attacking it directly. So yeah, the fields to the north of Umansk are being taken. The fields between Novopokrovska and Sinivka have been taken, plus the village of Novopokrovska. And so Novooleksandrivka is the last the last kind of big defense network, or not network, but village that the Ukrainians could hold up in to try to slow down the Russians from their attempt to reach the Vochachka River. So, the battle has started for this village this week, and we'll see, how much progress the Russians can make in the following weeks. I'm expecting probably somewhere here that the Russians will storm Yasnobrodovka and finally reach their end goal of reaching this area right here. And because then once they reach here, they can start advancing along these fields and start taking, and start putting up positions along the Vochachka River. They're actually doing this, and we could see a mini version of this happening in Nataliva. They reached their end goal of reaching the, this water reservoir here, which gives them a natural defense from the Ukrainian positions in Karlovka. And now that they've secured themselves here, the Russians have actually gained positions along these trees right here. And now they are advancing and trying to reach the end goal, which is right here. And basically, this bridge will be the dividing line between the Ukrainian side and the Russian side. And but in order to do that, if they want to do the same thing here, start taking the tree lines, here, and start, moving upwards, they need to take Yasnobrodovka. So I'm expecting some sort of Russian advance to take this village very soon. So because they need that if they want to continue pushing northwards here and start trying to cut off, Novooleksandrivka from the back here. So yeah, the lot of advances in the Pokrovsk front, as they call it now. The Russians are, I believe that probably by the by the end of July or so, I think the front line might look something like this. We'll say maybe this is the end. This is where the Russians want to be probably by the end of July or so. Something like this maybe. And then kind of have a position here, and then the main not only will they finally push the Ukrainians fully from Donetsk in the northern part at least, they will also be able to have under fire control the Pokrovsk-Konstantinovka highway, and then probably for August and September, the Russians will then focus on going northwest. I think then they will stop here and continue moving. Probably try to physically cut the highway, and they'll probably start trying to move in this general direction. Try to take these villages right here, and then probably cut it right here or so. And so, because I'm pretty certain the Ukrainians are trying to build like some sort of defenses all along this highway here. But yeah, so and by the end of summer, they'll obviously want to have Chasiv Yar under wraps, and then that way for the winter of 2024-2025, this could set them up pretty well for starting the offensive. Because then if by the end of summer, by say October or so this year, the front line might go something like this, right? Chasiv Yar would have fallen. They might start trying to cut the Konstantinovka Torezk highway, and then maybe the Russians are here. And then they'll also try to advance from here and try to link up these two forces and encircle Toretsk in New York. So that is probably going to be the goal of the Russian winter offensive, to take Toretsk. But that is first again, slow grinds. It's again, tactical positioning to improve positions. And again, these are good. Taking Chasiv Yar would be a big boon. This would give the Russians the high ground and the commanding heights over the Slavyansk-Toretsk line. Taking Toretsk would put the pressure off Grigorivka, or Gorlivka, I should say, actually, and attack the flanks of the Slavyansk-Toretsk defense line from the back. And this will also allow them to start advancing towards Pokrovsk and begin the battles for that city. This will help the Russians immensely for the battle for Donbass. So, which is one of the main goals of the Russian offensive here. So, that's what's happening in Donetsk. Let's go to the South Donetsk direction, because that's where a lot of other changes have happened in this South Donetsk direction here. One thing to note is that the battle for Novolska has started again. Remember, the Russians took this village a few months ago. The Ukrainians took it back, and now this week we got confirmation the Russians are at least in the southern portion of Novolska and have entered this village again. The Ukrainians are trying to hold it on for as long as possible, but the Russians really want to hold it because they really want to push the Ukrainians away from Donetsk, and they don't want Ukrainian positions, to continuously, they don't want Ukrainian artillery to still be in these fields here and be able to shell Donetsk from this area. So they really want to take Novolska to push the Ukrainian artillery back to this area, which will push them even further away and less likely to shell Donetsk. The battle for Krasnogorivka is still ongoing. We got some confirmation that the Russians are kind of in positions behind, entered the residential area in this area to the north of this kind of semicircle here, or this roundabout, and they are trying to get behind the Ukrainian positions in these high-rise buildings. The Russians are also trying to advance and battle for these high-rise buildings here and for this hospital. This hospital prevents the Russians from encircling or cutting off the Ukrainians from the north in Krasnogorivka. So the battle for the Krasnogorivka hospital is ongoing. The Russians have cleared up the westernmost outskirts of Krasnogorivka, not the westernmost outskirts, but kind of secured themselves along this area right here, and are putting some distance between Ukrainian positions out in the fields and their flank here. And so, the Russians are slowly but surely making the battle for this residential area of Krasnogorivka ongoing. And probably the goal is to take the center, this residential area right here. And while these areas right here technically form part of the Krasnogorivka, once the center part of the residential areas falls, it'll be a lot more quicker to take these areas right here, which will also be facilitated easier if they're able to take Novolska and start trying to outflank Krasnogorivka from the east here. So the Russians are slowly grinding in the center of Krasnogorivka, and it's a pretty big miracle that they're actually still managing to push the Ukrainians away from here. One of the biggest consequences of this war so far has been the fall of Grigorivka. Now, there's been some sources saying this village has fallen for the last month or so now, actually. But we actually got geolocated confirmation of the Russians having complete control of Grigorivka. And not only that, the battle for Novooleksandrivka has begun. The most western parts geolocated footage of those the most western part of the geolocated footage shows the Russians entering the eastern outskirts of Novooleksandrivka here. And so, getting a foothold in this village is basically the last village on the road to Kharkova right here, which is one of the main Ukrainian cities in Donbass. It's on top, it's like Pokrovsk or Slavyansk or something. It's a big city. It's the center of all Ukrainian positions in the South Donetsk direction. It's like kind of the headquarters and where a major supply base and logistics center And taking Karakova will be a big blow, though it'll be very, again, though, they need to secure their flanks a bit more. Again, because, taking Grigorivka might be easy, but let's say they take Masklyanovka and the front lines like this, right? If they take this village, they still have, these positions, they'll be able to be out, they'll be flanked from the fields here, and then they'll be in a very big spot, also from the north. Taking Grigorivka was basically possible after they were able to capture Pobeba. But if they want to advance more to Masklyanovka, I think they'll need to secure Konstantinovka first and, take a few more of the fields before they take Masklyanovka. So, but again, the fact they took Grigorivka is another good step in pushing the Ukrainians away from Donetsk. Because now the Ukrainian artillery can't be in Masklyanovka anymore, because that's way too close to the front line. They'll have to be back here in Karakova, which, before, when they were battling for Mariinka, Ukrainian artillery was in Grigorivka. But now that they've taken this town, Ukrainian artillery is getting pushed further back, and they can no longer shell Donetsk as much. So the Grigorivka has fallen to the Russians. I'm expecting probably that the Russians will not only focus on Konstantinovka, but probably try to finally storm this stronghold of the Ukrainians in these fields between Krasnogrivka and Grigorivka, and probably try to have this be the front line right here, and because now that they've secured the westernmost outskirts of Krasnogrivka here, they'll be able to have a better what's the right word, defense line here along these reservoirs here, and have their front line go like this. And the Russians will probably wait until the Russians completely take Grigorivka and have the front line be like, or Krasnogrivka, and have the front line go like this before they start attacking Masklyanovka and try, because then they'll have the northern flank a bit more secure here. So again, this is all part of the operation to push the Ukrainians away from Donetsk city. In the more southern part of this here, the Russians are still doing their offensive to encircle Konstantinovka, which will cut off the main supply route to Ugledar. One of the main focuses of this week has been the complete capture of the village of Pereskovka here. The Russians did a big offensive and took this village, and now have secured themselves kind of along the tree lines here. And the Ukrainians fell back to the northern suburbs and farms of Konstantinovka. Again, Perestovka taking that village is a good first step. The Russians still have to clear these fields between Pobeba and Perestovka, and clear these fields here before they can start clearing the farms and dachas to the north of Konstantinovka. But taking Perestovka was a good first step for the Russians. The Russians are also advancing in the south here, trying to get to the southern outskirts of Konstantinovka. The Russians are trying to reach this tree line right here. They're advancing along this road here. They are also advancing near this chalk farm here, and trying to push the Ukrainians away from these, this forest right here. So again, attacking in the fields is very dangerous. The Russians would lose a lot of tanks and a lot of vehicles assaulting it here, but it's very how would you say it? It's very dangerous for the Russians to attack in the field. So along with the Ukrainians, but especially on the attack, which is what the Russians are. So the Russians have to slowly but surely get closer and closer to the southern outskirts of Konstantinovka and clear the fields that lead to the highway between Konstantinovka and Ugledar. And again, it's a repeat of Novooleksandrivka. They're trying to take the fields to the north and south of it, and then storm the village. And that's what's going to happen in Konstantinovka, which is going to be the goal for the summer. And then for the winter offensive, I'm assuming that once Konstantinovka falls, they're going to start trying to siege Ugledar and take that. And then a little bit more in the south Donetsk direction in this area, the Russians actually got confirmation. The Russians have complete control over the village of Starmayorska here. They've taken the entire village, according to the Russian Minister of Defense. And the Russians are now entering the residential area of Urozhaina after taking the farms in the south of it. And I'm pretty certain that now that the Russians will secure themselves to the north here and then start crossing the river here and attacking Urozhaina from two fronts and forcing the Ukrainians to fall back. This is actually how the Ukrainians won these two villages in their counteroffensive. They took Starmayorska, and that's how they were able to take Urozhaina. So the Russians are basically redoing um, what they were doing, what the Ukrainians did in 2023, except now it's happening in 2024. So I'm pretty certain the Russians will be able to take these two villages. So that's the whole Donetsk front. Let's go to the next one of the other main areas of the Russian offensive, which is in Chasiv Yar. Now, one thing to talk about Chasiv Yar for this week is a week of clarifications. We got some more clarifications on what exactly is actually happening. So last week I talked about the fall of Eastern Chasiv Yar, which means this canal district, which has been the center of the Chasiv Yar fighting for the last 2 months. I said this entire area fell, but I got a little bit ahead of myself. The Ukrainians still have some positions in the westernmost outskirts right here. The Russians just took the eastern and southern part of this canal microdistrict. Some sources say that this factory up in the northern sector has also been taken, according to Rybar. But to say that this entire area has been taken was a bit of an overstatement on my part last week. The Ukrainians still have some positions and don't want to fall back to the canal yet. But so the Russians are still trying to assault this, still bombing this to hell. So we will see. That's a bit of clarification. The Russians have improved their positions. They actually have a position in the canal microdistrict, but the Ukrainians still do too, and they're still battling it out here. So we'll see how long it takes for the Russians to fully kick the Ukrainians down and push them to the center of Chasiv Yar. A bit more to the north here, we got some clarification here. Kalinova is still being contested. It's a bit in a fog of war because we still see Ukrainians shelling Russian positions here, but we also see Russians droning here. So we could say Kalinova is a bit in a gray zone. It's not like the Russians have completely secured themselves along the canal in the north as we originally thought, but that doesn't mean the Ukrainians are still holding on to this village like in secure positions. It's like being fought over back and forth. So the Russians aren't as secure in the north as we originally thought as well, but Kalinova is still being contested, and again, the main purpose here is the Russians want to reach the canal zone, or at least the Sovietsky canal, and that means they have to secure themselves in Kalinova and secure the canal microdistrict. So the Ukrainians are fighting tooth and nail to prevent those two things from happening, because if they reach the canal, then they could start doing their plans to encircle Chasiv Yar, the center of Chasiv Yar. We also got a bit more clarifications here. In Ivanivka, it looks like the Russian forces have expanded the zone of control to the south of Ivanivka, took this tree line here, and actually managed to capture another tree, this forest to the south here. This is improving tremendously the Russian positions in the south of the canal microdistrict. This is where the Russians have had the most success. And, the Russians might continuously try to clear these forests to the south here and, continue moving along the canal and start taking more of these forests here. Because, they want to clear this area from the Ukrainians as well. So, because they need to take this area if they want to want to advance to the south and encircle Chasiv Yar from the south here. So the south is where the Russians had the most success, but the Russians need success in the north and the center. And the battle for Kalinova in the canal microdistrict is going in the Russian favor, but it's a matter of being contested still by the Ukrainians. So it's not completely secure as we thought. Let's now go to the Seversk front. This is actually a very interesting front. I thought they were going to be quiet on this front, but they're actually not. One thing to keep in mind here in the Seversk front is one of the biggest changes. So we were talking about Bilogorivka and how the Russians have taken the center of the village, and the Ukrainians fell back to the heights behind the village right here. And I said, there is no way that the Russians will be able to hold their positions in Bilogorivka because this village is completely bombed to hell. They might as well have been taking the moon because of how destructive how it looks from here. It looks like the face of the moon with all these craters and shit. So anyway, this is a very, I'm like, they need to either take these hills to the west of Bilogorivka, or they need to take the Chalk Mountain, because these two were the two dominant heights, and Bilogorivka was more on the lowland. And this week we got confirmation that the Russians have stormed and have taken the Chalk Mountain right here. And this makes sense. This not only secures Russian gains in Bilogorivka, this will basically prevent the Ukrainians from pushing the Russians out from Bilogorivka, because now the Russians have positions in this chalk factory, or Chalk Mountain, or whatever the fuck it's called. And And so it's very important in terms of Russian positions in holding their gains in Bilogorivka. Maybe because the Ukrainians pulled a lot of troops from this area to the Kharkov front, but yeah, it's very taking this chalk mountain here is very good tactically because now the Russians have a good position to hold their gains in Bilogorivka. So that's taking this chalk factory by storm was a very good gain for the Russians this week. One thing we also have to keep in mind here is the Russians are also actually advancing a bit in the vicinity of whatever the fuck this is called. Is a long ass name. And there's this giant trench fortification here. This has been the front line for almost 2 years, so the Ukrainians have built this up. But the Russians are actually advancing and are starting to take the trenches that are to the north of Viktor-Mayanska in this area. So they're trying to put some distance between the Lysychansk oil refinery and this village right here. And they're basically trying to storm these trenches and clear them. And so this is a very big, and actually they had some success in that department. So, they're putting pressure on this area of the Seversk front. So it looks like the Russians have opted for an offensive on Seversk, or at least maybe not a main one like we see in Chasov Yar or in the Pokrovsk direction, but this definitely is another area that they've opened. And it's the Russians are slowly getting to Seversk. If I was it, I would have probably tried to outflank Seversk or something from Liman, probably instead of trying to attack it directly. But who knows? I don't know. So yeah, the Russians have they're pushing this. They're also advancing the south. One of the main things is the advancements of the Russians along this rail line towards the village of Vinivka, Ivano-Dyrivka, and so forth have actually secured the flanks to the north to the east of Rozdolovka. So the Ukrainians kind of held their positions in Rozdolovka and Vysola after the fall of Solidar, but the Russians from pushing from the south here have managed to have basically advanced so far north here that they managed to outflank the Ukrainians in the tree lines to the north of Vysola, and managed to take a huge part of land to the north of Vysola. And that has facilitated the battle for Rozdolovka. So the battle for this village is now being undertaken, and we actually got geolocated footage of the Russians advancing here and taking up positions on the eastern flank of Rozdolovka. Now that the Russians have positions here and they're now battling for the village, the Ukrainians are able to push the Russians back, because anytime they try to advance, they would advance to their fields and get droned. But taking Rozdolovka, now that they're in Rozdolovka, I expect this village to fall pretty rapidly, and the Russians will, take this village and, probably start trying to advance along this rail line that goes from Bakhmut to Seversk, and kind of do the same thing they're doing here. Kind of maybe, use these skip these fields altogether, and just kind of move along this river and this rail line along with here, and just start going towards the southern outskirts of Seversk here. So we'll see. The Russians are making good progress here. They're battling for Rozdolovka. They're getting closer and closer to Vimka. And this both sides kind of complement each other. So let's say the Russians are even more successful here, and they manage to take Vimka, and they reach this area. They're able to start, maybe they might want to cross the fields here, and then if they take Rozdolovka and they start trying to attack towards Perzina here, the Ukrainian grouping in this area will be like, oh shit, we're getting attacked from from getting out flank. Let's getting flanked. Let's retreat to more better positions in Zanivka here, right? And then then the Russians will be able to advance here, and then have this area under their control. So. Sorry for my schizophrenic drawings here, but yeah, it looks like the Russians have opted to battle for Seversk, because this actually extends the front line a lot. So, even if they don't want to do what I was advocating for, which was just like advancing on Liman, advancing from Bakhmut to the southwest here, and kind of linking up these two groupings and kind of cutting off Seversk and not having the battle for it at all, maybe they did do that. Maybe they were testing the waters when they tried to advance towards Terney and realized that would be a suicidal thing, and they decided just to advance towards Seversk directly. Maybe. I mean, I'm not like an expert. Obviously, the people on the ground there know more than I do. So maybe they've tested the waters and realized that a direct attack might be better. Um, so, uh, but taking Seversk even just by directly, so let's say the front line then goes like this, um, this will massively reduce the front line, and the Russians no longer have to put troops here and put troops here. This will all it will flatten the front line and make Russian positions a lot more tenable in this area, or at least less burdensome. No changes in the Lemont front. In the Kupiansk front, we actually have a lot of changes. So this week, let's talk about this area. The Russians are still trying to take Stepovo Novooleksandrivka, and secure their gains in these outskirts villages, as I call them. And the Russians are advancing to the northern sector of Stepovo Novooleksandrivka, taking more positions to the north. They were advancing along this rail line, trying to reach to the southern part of Stepovo Novooleksandrivka. Made small gains this week in that regard. But the Ukrainians are still holding onto this village. But again, they're doing the same thing they did in Ivanivka. They're trying to squeeze the Ukrainians out of it. And I expect probably by the end of next week, maybe in 2 weeks, that the Russians will take Stepovo Novooleksandrivka. And they'll probably then put a pause on this area and focus on other parts of this Kupiansk front. But this is a very good goal for the Russians, because then the Ukrainians will have to fall back to Petropavlovka, to the southern outskirts of the southern suburbs of Kupiansk. This will be where the Ukrainians could put up positions again. This has been a very solid progress once they take Stepovo Novooleksandrivka. But again, also in the southern here. Now we talked about the fall of Berestova like 2-3 weeks ago, and while the Russians have taken this village, the Russians are now actually focusing on a new axis of advance. So now, before it was the Klisovka-Kletarovka front, but now they're focusing on the Stelomenivka front. These villages have so long names that I will butcher them to hell, so I'm sorry for that. Anyway, this week we actually have a lot of progress here. So we talked about how the Russians are trying to secure themselves in the north here, in the northern part of Stilmakhnovka here, with Novooleksandrivka and Berestova, and trying to clear the fields between these two villages. The Russians have been doing that. Again, they're moving to the south here. But one thing that they made very big advancements of is in the south in here. The Russian Ministry of Defense has announced that the Russians have taken the villages of Novooleksandrivka and Andriivka. Now, these villages aren't, these villages are so fucking small that you might as there's more people in the village in the planet Jupiter than there are in these villages. So it's not like they capture anything. But one thing that is important here is it's not necessarily the village that's being captured. It's the tactical significance of it. Not only is this along a river, so the Russians actually have a good position to defend themselves here from any Ukrainian counterattack. They could then attack Stilmakhnovka from the south here. So, the Russians have been trying to get to the outskirts of Stilmakhnovka from the east. They are securing themselves in the north here, and now they are in the south. And I have no doubt the next goal for the Russians for the next week or two will be storming Stilmakhnovka from the north, east, and south, and then the front line will go something like this. This will actually be good because these are 3 villages in the Luhansk Oblast, and I don't think it's a coincidence the Russians have put a lot of focus on trying to take Bilogorivka, taking the Chalk Mountain, and finally taking this village and trying to secure themselves here, because this is part of Luhansk Oblast. Those 3 villages are part of Luhansk Oblast, and they want to take the last few villages that remain under Ukrainian control, because then they really want to say, hey, we have 100% control over the Luhansk Oblast, because right now it's a bit of a political, not nightmare, but political inconvenience that Luhansk is 99-98% under the Russians, but they can't say they completely control it, because there are still parts of it that are under Ukrainian control. No changes in the Lemont front. So Kupiansk is I expect that after they take Stepovo Novooleksandrivka and these 3 villages, the Russians will probably try to advance in these areas right here, take Nadida and this area right here, and push the Ukrainians to the Kharkov Oblast towards Borova. The only tricky thing is this area. I don't know how the Russians will be able to take Makivka or Nevsky here. These are the Ukrainians have strong positions in these areas here. They have strong trenches here, and a direct assault will be very costly for the Russians. I'm probably expecting that the Russians will probably do my guess is the Russians will try to split the place in half. So let's say they do everything they want and the front line now goes something like this. I'm expecting maybe some sort of stormed by the Russians to try to push towards maybe this area right here and reach the village of Borova here. So, and then split this area in half. And then once this area is split in half, they could then start moving southwards here, and, this area, and start cutting off this area and force the Ukrainians away from here. So, there's a lot of, I think that's the only way. It's going to be very, again, there's a bunch of open fields between Russian positions and Ukrainian positions. So attacking directly from current Russian front lines is going to be very dangerous. So we'll see what happens. There's been no changes in the Kherson front. A lot of people are saying that the village of Krinky has been completely retaken by the Russians, that the Ukrainians gave up because they sent their Marine brigades to the Kharkov front. So the Russians, there's no longer Ukrainian presence in the Russian side of the Dnieper, but the battle for the islands of the Dnieper River are still ongoing. So, that was a very retarded decision by the Ukrainians to send their elite Marine brigades to fight to keep a bridgehead because they wanted a PR victory. No one bought it. They didn't give them any sort of PR stunts. It didn't give them any extra shit. It was a waste of time, and they wasted thousands of soldiers for nothing. That was a waste of shit. Anyway, no changes in the Zaporozhye front. There's been some talks that the Russians have, actually coming, breaking news here, coming to you at 7 a.m., Martha, do you have anything else to say type shit. I actually got some breaking news just now that the Russians actually captured this village right here, the Chadivka, as it's called here, which is kind of surprising. Apparently that's been confirmed by the Russian Ministry of Defense. So if that's the case, that would be a very big goal. Because if that's the case, then it looks like the Russians are trying to cut the main highway connecting Gilipolye and Orekov. Because if they could cut this highway right here, that'd be a very big trouble for the Ukrainians. But I'm sure, because the Ukrainians don't have a lot of troops here. They're trying to hold the Russians back here with just territorial defense. So if the Russians actually have serious forces here, they could cause serious damage to the defense of the Ukrainians in Zaporozhye. And lastly, but not leastly, we're going to now talk to the Kharkov front. The Russians are went on the offensive here, but they're also on the defensive here. Let's talk about where they're on the defensive. The Russians are on the defensive for the Battle of Globokha. Now it's no longer the Battle of Lipsy. The Ukrainians pushed the Russians out from that village. However, the Ukrainians have been trying to they're trying to get to the flanks of Globokha, attacking to the west here, and also trying to attack through these fields to the east. Now, they're trying to attack them, get into Globokha. However, they have failed in that endeavor. However, they have taken more forward positions. So, for example, the Ukrainians took this tree line right here. And so they're trying to assault Russian positions in this area right here. There's a bit of a Russian trench net, little strong defense point right here that the Ukrainians are trying to storm, because if they take it, then they could attack Globokha from the east along with attacking Globokha from the west. And so they are trying to outflank this town here. But it's slow but steady against, it's going to be a big tough nut to crack if they want to take Globokha. The Ukrainians are so the Ukrainians are on the offensive on the Lipsy front here. It looks like the Russians are also trying to expand the bridgehead from Luhansk here. So while the Ukrainians are focusing on Globokha, they are also the Russians are actually expanding and trying to take a few tree lines here and getting closer to the villages of Zelina and Nishchuska here, and trying to get to these two villages right here. I think maybe they want to link up these two fronts here, because right now they're two separate fronts and there's no way to help connect these two. I mean, there is. I mean, I don't think it's that much of a big difference, because it's like, well, they could just go through, like, take a road and go here or something. Like, they could go through Russian territory. They don't necessarily need to connect it here. It's like, so I actually, never mind that. I think, that's kind of retarded. Anyway, so the Ukrainians are on the offensive in the Lipsy front. However, the Russians are actually on the offensive in the Volchansk front. Now, as we talked about, the northern part of Volchansk is what is getting fought over. And, and before, the Ukrainians are actually put a bunch of additional reserves here and trying to hold positions here. However, they actually managed to, the Russians actually went on the offensive here and are now trying to take the northern part of Volchansk at least. And one thing is that the Russians have taken what they call the Volchansk factory. Well, they don't call it that. They call it some weird. the aggregate fact, whatever the fuck it's called. They took this factory right here, which is very, very, because this factory gives them positions to hold the northern part of Vachansk, gives them a defense like linchpin to hold along the Vachachka River. Is this the same Vachachka River that goes through Donetsk by chance? That's crazy. Anyway, one of the big things is the Ukrainians are in what they call the Citadel. The Ukrainians are holding this position at all costs, and so it's going to be very hard for the Russians to hold on to this to force themselves into the high-rise buildings here. But the Ukrainians are holding on for dear life because they do not want to lose the Citadel, because if the Citadel falls, then the northern part of Vachansk will fall, and the chance for the Ukrainians to push the Russians out of Vachansk becomes a lot more harder. But on the flip side, though, that even if the Russians take the northern part of Vachansk, there is still the southern part of Vachansk, and that is, it's the same position of the Russians. The Russians crossing this river will be a tough nut to crack. So Vachansk might be split in half. So yeah. The battle for Vachansk is still ongoing. And the Russians are still actually advanced a little bit to the west here. They actually took some more positions along these forests to the east here, trying to get closer to the village of Bukovka here, and kind of secure their positions along this river here. But yeah, so that is a lot of advancements along the entire front, all over the front. The Russians are attacking everywhere. But again, these are slow grinding offensives, and these will continue going on like this until one side collapses, like it was in World War I. So that's the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, this weekly Russian Ukrainian War update. Be sure to subscribe to my channel to continue receiving these weekly Russian Ukrainian War updates. Be sure to like this video, share this video around, comment your thoughts, and hope you guys enjoyed. So aim high and wander on.